I'm just going to speak for a few minutes about sleeping when you have inflammatory pain from autoimmune disease. So this presentation is about doing things that can improve your chances of sleeping well, even in the midst of painful flare-ups or other symptoms. And first, it's sort of in two parts. I'd like to discuss first some sleep tips for those of you who don't have severe sleep problems right now and just want to get your sleep as good as it can be. And then I'm going to go into the most common sleep disorder, which is insomnia, which has its own treatment. And I will explain what that treatment is and what it is, and then give you some resources so that you can access help. You probably are very aware of this triangle because you experience it, that there's a relationship between sleep, pain, and fatigue that's circular. So any one of these things affects the other. And of course, when we have pain, it affects our sleep. When we're not sleeping, it makes the pain worse. And fatigue goes along with poor sleep, and pain causes fatigue. So this is a very much a circular pattern that happens. And in the midst, like this is in the context of this is in the midst of all the other things going on in our lives. So our health, our family and relationships, our daytime responsibilities, world affairs, of course. So what we're going to focus on is the sleep part here. And I want to say that it's not just what we all know, that there's this triangle. We know this from experience, but research very much confirms this very close relationship between sleep and pain and fatigue. And I'm just going to show you quickly one study, well, two studies actually that were published this year that involve autoimmune inflammatory disease and sleep. And these are both reviews. This one is focused on rheumatoid arthritis. And basically, I've reprinted one of the conclusions of this is we present evidence that inflammatory and autonomic arousal mechanisms contribute to a misalignment of sleep-wake activity such that sleep disturbance leads to excessive increases in inflammation. In turn, inflammation can lead to further disturbances of sleep, and this feed-forward loop is hypothesized to serve as an accelerator of RA symptoms. So here we have inflammation leading to sleep-wake problems leading to inflammation, which leads to further disturbances of sleep, and so on. So this isn't just what we're experiencing, but it's a very much supported by research. So I thought you might be interested in that. And then there's another study that's about circadian rhythms in autoimmune inflammatory disease. And this is another review. Now, sleep is very much controlled by a circadian rhythm, as well as another process that I'll show you in a second. And so circadian rhythms are very important in the control of sleep. And here they find that there's emerging evidence linking the circadian cycle with immune disturbances, suggesting that sleep disturbances, including difficulty falling asleep, maintaining sleep, and daytime fatigue, should be considered direct manifestations of the disease rather than associated symptoms. So again, this is confirming the very close interaction between sleep and inflammation and inflammatory diseases. And that came out this year as well. Now, I'm going to show you this, and this is something that has helped me for decades understand what happens with sleep and what happens with sleep problems. and how we can fix them. And it's just two processes here that are illustrated in this stylized way. And along the x-axis here is time of day, 7 o'clock in the morning, 11 at night. And along the y-axis is the propensity to sleep. So the chance of falling asleep quickly and staying asleep and having a very good sleep. And so one of these processes is a homeostatic one that builds up the longer we've been awake. And then it drops off when we sleep and it builds up the next day. This blue period is sleep here. So this is sort of like the hunger drive that it builds up the longer it's been since we last ate. This is the sleep drive. It builds up the the more time has passed since we last slept. And if we stay up a bit later, it tends to go up. The other one is one I just referred to, circadian, which is also a very important regulator of our sleep. And so you may be familiar with this term. Put your hand up if you are, because I think you guys are really, yeah, okay. You're really up on stuff. So just to review then, circadian rhythms are 24-hour rhythms that we all have in our bodies, and all living creatures on Earth have circadian rhythms because we live on Earth and that rotates on its axis every 24 hours. So we have a light-dark cycle that we're attuned to. And so the circadian rhythm, there's a circadian rhythm of sleep and wakefulness, as well as circadian rhythms of hormones. Our body temperature rhythm is on a circadian rhythm. And with the sleep-wake rhythm, circadian one, there's a very good time to sleep and there's a bad time to sleep. And when this is stable, when this rhythm is stable, we tend to get a very good sleep. And when this process is high and this process is high, that sets the stage for very good sleep. And if we remove the interference with those, we sleep well. So that's the basis of a lot of what I do and how I understand how things work. And this was reported back in the 70s and 80s, this two-process model, and it's still very, very robust way of understanding the regulation of sleep and wakefulness. Now, this shows the circadian and the homeostatic rhythms, but I just want you to focus on the circadian one here. And this diagram is just to show you the how it rises and falls regularly. So this is nighttime, morning, afternoon, and evening. And you can see it goes up and down regularly. Nice. And when that is very regular, and it's very regular if we have light in the daytime and darkness at night, then that bodes well for our sleep. So this is when we're meant to be awake. And this is when we're meant to be asleep or getting very sleepy and getting into bed. Just biologically, that's what we're meant to do. So now that I've covered that, sort of the regulation of sleep and wakefulness in a very general way, I want to provide 9 tips for sleeping well if you don't have a major problem with your sleep. And then I'll go into what to do if you do have a major problem. So I've got 9 tips. The first one is actually based on this circadian cycle. Although light and darkness are very strong cues for the sleep-wake circadian rhythm, our behaviors also have an influence. And we know that getting up at the same time every day, so waking up and getting out of bed at the same time of day, 7 days a week, really helps strengthen the circadian aspect of sleep regulation. So that's helpful. Having a regular bedtime is helpful too, not quite as much as the rise time, but it can't hurt. And then regular meal times can help allow our internal circadian rhythms to be healthy as well. Second one is don't try to sleep. Sleep is something that comes when we're open to it, but not when we're on a mission to directly find it and to seek it out. It's kind of like happiness in a way. When we try too hard, it disappears. We have to just let the conditions be fine and then not even worry about it. So know that it's normal to have some sleep difficulty, and remove any musts. So take any pressure off yourself to sleep, because the pressure itself can perpetuate sleep problems. Leave the bed if you're not sleeping. So going to another room and doing something, doesn't really matter what, coming back when you're sleepy. What this will do is prevent your bed from being associated with wakefulness and frustration, and help link your bed with very good sleep. Be aware of 24-hour natural light patterns, as I was saying. Bright light in the morning is helpful, and dim light in the evening. Now, I am aware with lupus that there may be limits to the light exposure, but in general, it does help us to wake up if we have bright light in the morning. Now, take a nap if you're sleepy. So a lot of us here, you shouldn't nap if you have any trouble sleeping. But in fact, we know that a nap in the afternoon is a very healthy time to nap, to have a short sleep. And it's unlikely to interfere with nighttime sleep if it's in that time zone. Now, this nap, you don't want to sleep for hours. You want to, unless you're sick or something, you want to limit it to about 30 to 45 minutes. But perfectly healthy, it does restore, performance, and often makes us feel more rested for the rest of the day. Next one is give your brain a break before you go to bed, of course. You don't want to be working right up to bed. Turn off electronics at least an hour before bed. And it's helpful to shift to something else. Here I have a jigsaw puzzle, so something that doesn't require too much thinking and uses maybe your visual spatial part of your brain may be helpful. All right, dealing with worries. So worries tend to come up, don't they, when we're lying in bed before we fall asleep. And sometimes they fill up a lot of space. They come up big time often. And when we haven't slept for a while, sometimes they actually are worries about sleep itself. But if we have any kind of worries, I find it helpful to separate them into worries that we can control and worries outside of our control. So an example of under our control would be things like I'm working on a writing project that's not finished and the deadline's coming up. So that's something that I could potentially control by getting an extension or by getting help with the project or whatever. And another example would be some cleaning that I didn't get to today that I really wanted to do, or maybe I regretted saying something on the phone today to a relative. Those are things under my control. Those outside my control might be things like, will my 10-year-old grandchild go to university? What will my son's mortgage be? What will the rate be in 3 years from now? These are things I can't possibly know or figure out right now. So for those under my control, I recommend something called Clear Your Head Time. I give it that name, Clear Your Head Time. It's basically taking anything that's in your head. It could be a worry, it could be just other miscellaneous thoughts, and writing them down in the evening, before you go to bed or earlier in the evening, and then finding a temporary solution for them just for the night. So if it's something about, talking to a relative, I regretted something that I said, maybe my note to myself will be, well, I'm going to call that person tomorrow at lunchtime and apologize or whatever. So I find a plan or something just for the night, so that there's a solution, so that when it comes up when I'm in bed, I know I've already dealt with it for the night. Those outside your control, I find it helpful to float them away. So if you can use your visual imagery to think of these worries going into a balloon or a bubble and floating away, that can be very helpful. Because the more these worries stay on our mind, the more they can perpetuate trouble falling asleep, right? So these are a couple of techniques. Manage stress, and I'm sure you've all been talking about that and ways to do that. Simplifying things is really helpful, so that we're not rushing around. Easier said than done, I know, but if we aim towards that, that can be very helpful. And of course, relaxation and meditation. We use a lot of mindfulness meditation in our clinic. And keeping in touch with supportive others. So, and you're doing that now. So that's wonderful. And finally, get some fresh air and movement. You may not be doing this already. We know from research that it doesn't really matter what kind of exercise you're getting, whether it's strength training, whether it's cardiovascular, or whether it's something like yoga. They all have some effects on sleep in terms of sleep improvements. Yeah, so those are my tips. And they're a little bit different from the typical, what you call sleep hygiene tips. These ones are a little more powerful than the typical ones that say avoid caffeine and so on, because I find people know the sleep hygiene, the typical sleep hygiene tips. All right, I'm going to shift now to insomnia, the sleep disorder, because this is a different kettle of fish. Once the sleep problem has gone on for some time, then it takes on a life of its own. And the things that I've just showed you are not enough to reverse the sleep problem. So by definition, this is the clinical definition for insomnia, it's difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. And it's happening at least 3 nights a week, and it's causing distress or impairment in functioning. So our mood tends to go down. It's hard to concentrate. We may want to withdraw. We may be canceling arrangements we had to meet with other people. It's very isolating, actually. And when it's gone on for at least 3 months, it's called chronic insomnia. So I'm going to skip right away to the treatment for it. And then I'm going to give you the evidence for the treatment and the effectiveness of it. And then I'm going to briefly explain what it is. So I'm kind of doing this backwards. But I don't have time to go into the whole treatment today, but at least I can steer you in the right direction for getting treatment if that's what you want to do. So the best treatment we have is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. And you may be familiar with CBT for anxiety or depression, and I'm sure the psychologists among you are very familiar with CBT. But this is quite different. The hyphen and the I really make this a unique intervention because it's very sleep specific. And it works with those biological rhythms that regulate sleep and wakefulness that we were just looking at a minute ago. And it's recommended in medical guidelines all over the world now for insomnia treatment of chronic insomnia as the first line treatment above and beyond any kind of medication. So in the guidelines, when they get to the medication section for sleep medications, the guidelines consistently say not to be used unless CBTI has been tried and is not working or is not available. So CBTI is the treatment, that the best treatment we have now for chronic insomnia. And the reason it's recommended is it's very effective. So there have been decades of randomized controlled trials on it. And here I'm just summarizing some of the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses of those randomized controlled trials. And they all converge to find good effects on sleep. And you can see that it's been tried not only in people who have just chronic insomnia, but people who have what we call comorbid insomnia. So insomnia with a medical problem or a mental health problem. And this includes chronic pain. And moreover, what these studies say is that there's not only good effects on sleep, but there's good effects on the comorbid symptoms. So if you have some depression, your depression is likely to improve with CBTI. If you have pain, your pain is likely to improve with CBTI. So it has very nice side effects on the actual other symptoms. And just to let you know that there was yet another study with autoimmune inflammatory disease. This is with rheumatoid arthritis that was published this year. And this is a randomized controlled trial of CBTI with people with RA, and concluding that CBTI has a clinically significant effect on patient-reported insomnia, sleep quality, fatigue, depression, and pain. So this is your go-to treatment if you have chronic insomnia. So what the heck is it? In a very general way, the way I describe it is they're cognitive, which is ways of thinking, and behavioral strategies that allow those biological processes to operate without interference. So the same ones that we've been talking about, the homeostatic and the circadian. So it's removing interference with those two so that we can harness those to get really good sleep. So full component CBTI has 4 parts to it. And the first part is time in bed restriction, sometimes called sleep restriction. And then there's something called stimulus control therapy. And these two are the most powerful, the most effective components of CBTI. The bottom 2 are less effective, but they can be very helpful to add in. Cognitive restructuring is basically looking at the thoughts, sleep-related worries, and making them less catastrophic. And then relaxation techniques. I just want to say that relaxation techniques by themselves are not sufficient to reverse chronic insomnia, but they're often added in if the person finds them helpful. But there's 1,000,001 apps for relaxation for insomnia, but we know that if you have chronic insomnia, they're unlikely to be enough, that you need the other components to benefit. So just to break down the 4 and describe very briefly what they are. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have time to kind of go into more depth, but just so you get the general idea, with time in bed restriction, there's you restrict your time that you spend in bed, so you have a sleep window and then you have a wake window. And that's very carefully prescribed based on your sleep patterns that are recorded with sleep diaries. So this builds up the sleep drive here. And then the other component is getting it up at a constant rise time. And this is stabilizing the circadian rhythm. So this is probably the most effective intervention that there is. It works quite quickly within about a couple of weeks, I would say. And then stimulus control therapy, we often do this hand in hand with time in bed restriction, and that is just getting out of bed when you're not sleeping and not doing anything in bed except sleeping. And this is to form a really strong association between the bed and very good sleep. Cognitive restructuring is, if you know about cognitive therapy, it's basically a cognitive therapy that's looking more specifically at sleep-related thoughts, because once we don't sleep for some time, the worries that come up at night tend to shift from worries about, life in general to worries about the fact that we're not sleeping. That's very common. And so we may have thoughts that, I'm going to feel horrible tomorrow, I'm not sleeping. And so there are ways to look at the specific thoughts that the person has, and do it in the light of day when things don't seem so horrible, and get them rebalanced so they're very realistic, but they're not as alerting, and they're not as likely to keep us awake. And then relaxation training. You probably are familiar with a lot of these methods, and they're all very good. It doesn't really matter which ones are used for sleep. They all seem to have about the same effect. But the difference between using them for stress management or anxiety and for sleep is that they're always done out of bed for sleep. That's because of the stimulus control. You don't want to do anything in bed except sleep. So these are usually done out of bed in the evening. And again, to stress that relaxation training alone is insufficient, if just by itself, to reverse chronic insomnia. All right, so I'm going to just point you in the direction of a couple of resources that are very helpful, that are online, places to start. And these are Canadian resources, but I think you could start there, and then you will find ones in the US and in Australia. I know there are similar programs available in both those countries. There are experts in CBTI in both those countries. But these two websites, so mysleepwell.ca is from Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada, and it's run by a colleague of mine who's a pharmacist. And this website has a lot of resources for CBTI, and they've all been reviewed for evidence. So they all are based in what works and what has been researched, and also how to sleep without sleeping pills. And if you are on sleeping pills and you want to come off your sleeping pills, there are guides here like about how to do that and why it might be important to not be on sleeping pills long term. So this is a very useful resource, mysleepwell.ca. And this is my website, sinkintosleep.com. This is the book that also has the same name. My website has some resources as well, and it has a description of different sleep disorders, including insomnia, but other sleep disorders. And it has this book is, I wrote it basically to let people know about CBTI and actually how they can do it by themselves if they don't have a trained CBTI provider. So if they don't know a sleep psychologist or someone that does this all the time, like it's always easier to do if you have a therapist working with you who knows this. But if you don't have one, this is a good guide, because it just goes through all the things we do in the clinic when people come in and guides you through step by step. And the website has some forms that are in the book that like how to figure out something called your sleep efficiency, and it has sleep diaries that you can download. So both these websites I would recommend as starting places if you want to start finding out about CBTI and whether it's something you want to pursue. I hope I've shown that we can improve sleep, and in so doing, improve pain and fatigue and other symptoms.